So the keynote, according to Toastmasters, and where you're required to do it as your elective or as a requirement in Pathways, is an 18 to 22 minute speech. So that's more than double. In fact, that's 3 times the average speech. So there are some difficulties perhaps for some of us to step up and give a keynote. Now, of course, in the real world, in the professional world of speaking, that keynote could be 45 to 50 minutes. It certainly could be a lot longer, a 90-minute one, but don't worry, we're not going to worry about that side today. Panelists, you can relax with that. But another thing that we do when it comes to public speaking is there are very short speeches that we also have to give, i.e. the elevator pitch, or for a professional speaker, there's the verbal speaker's reel. Now, normally in Toastmasters, it would be my job to introduce our panelists, but because we are saying, let's try some different things for speaking, I'm actually going to throw it over to them. I'm going to ask them to all take 60 seconds each to introduce themselves, tell you about what it is that they do in the speaking world, basically blatantly sell themselves, like the elevator pitch. You know, you get stuck in an elevator, there's the CEO you want to talk to, and you've got from the ground floor up to the 12th floor to say what you want to say in 60 seconds. Well, this is the opportunity we're going to start with here. So first of all, and we're going to have a red light at 60 seconds, please, Mr. Timer. First, I'm going to, thank you, there's the red light, we'll start. I'm now going to ask Lauren to start first to give us her 60-second keynote, 60-second elevator pitch or verbal speaker's reel. Thank you, Lauren.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ruahine, te pai maunga, ko manawa tū te awa, ko Lauren toko ingoa. Hello, good afternoon. So nice to connect with you all, and thank you, Sheryl, for that intro. So I'm based in the Manawatu. I grew up as the unsporty, shy kid who was always picked last for sports. But somehow when I went to university, I went to an aerobics class and they said, if you want to be an instructor, come and see us after. And so I did. And my life was flipped upside down and I started to teach health and wellness. And I became really passionate about helping people to boost their own health and well-being and energy and vitality. So fast forward to 21 years and now I work in workplace wellbeing. So I love to work with leadership teams and with workplaces doing team sessions, a lot around physical health and wellbeing, but even more so lately around mental health. So I talk about overcoming overwhelm, boosting your resilience, dealing with stress and anxiety. And I'm also a proud member of Palmerston North Advanced Toastmasters here in Palmerston North, and looking forward to hopefully joining the ranks of the accredited speakers, all going well this August. So thanks so much. Back to you, Sheryl.
Thank you, Lauren. She didn't mention that she's also a TEDx speaker, working towards the accredited speaker program, and yes, a DTM as well. So thank you, Lauren. Right, next, I'd like to invite Kingi to introduce himself, please. Kingi Biddle.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko ngongo taha te maunga, ko te rotorua nui a kahumata momoe e te moana, ko te papai oru te marae, ko ngā te whakau e te iwi. My name is Kingi Biddle. I come from the centre of the world, the capital of the universe known as Rotorua. Growing up in Rotorua, we're really awesome at telling stories, whether it be through song, whether it be through concerts, whether it be on our marae. And I find that with the ability to tell stories, people can actually more than understand, they can see clearly new lessons, new things that can help them get from A to B. I love doing that. That's why I'm here, to be able to share, because life's about giving things away and knowledge and sharing. And oftentimes you also get things, you get that back as well. I'm also really lucky because I'm one of the few people that has been a District 72 and District 112 District Champion for the World Championships of Public Speaking. Lovely to be here. Lovely to share. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you very much, Kingi. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Giora Barzilay. Please introduce yourself, Giora.
Thank you very much, Sheryl. My standard answer for the question, what is it that you do, Giora, is I don't really do much. But so, but what I do is after years of working in the real estate industry, I started to train, mentor, and coach real estate salespeople in developing their business and becoming better at what they do. I now also do some keynote speaking in that field as well. So not really doing much, but enjoying myself and helping, doing my best to help people become a little bit better at what they do.
Thank you, Giora. He says he doesn't do much. Oh my goodness, we hear all about the things he does. I think he does a lot more than he realizes. And now, please, can I ask Pritish Chandra to introduce himself?
Thank you, Sheryl. And hey, good afternoon, everyone. Bula, that gives it away. I'm Pritesh, originally from Fiji, and we moved here about 20 years ago. Life didn't go as we had expected. So throughout trying to settle in, find who I was as a person, find my identity, the real battle began. And when it was time for me to go to university, family circumstances were as such that I couldn't go. And that just kept my self-esteem, my confidence. It really kicked it hard, and to a point that I found myself at the lowest. But then over time, over the experience that life had for me, I somehow found Toastmasters. I will promote Toastmasters a bit. I found myself through Toastmasters, through giving those speeches, through leading. I found that I had a passion to inspire people. I had something in me, as Kingi said, that needed to be shared. And through that, I have managed to find two brands, Mr. MC Events and Better Version of You. And I will look to share that as we talk more. So thank you. That's me, Pritish.
Thank you, Pritesh, and thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. So now, to let everybody know what we're going to do, I'm going to ask the panel a number of questions, and for the first few questions, each of the panel members will answer the same question. I would also like to invite the audience, as we go through asking them questions, some things may pop into your mind that you'll go, oh, I need to know this too, when it comes to keynote speaking. So what I'd like to do is ask you to pose your question in the chat, but pose it to the moderator. So that's moderator Neil. So I'm hoping that you will have access to be able to put a question in the chat to the moderator. And if it's for someone specifically rather than open to the audience, then please put that person's name there as well. And what we'll do is we'll gather together, well, the royal we, Neil will, gather together the questions and come up with perhaps the most popular, most interesting questions. And should we have time at the end, then we'll try and address some of those questions. So just pop it in the chat for the moderator. Right, now the questions. So the first question will go to all our panel members. I'm going to throw it out to Kingi first, and it's all about keynotes, about creating them and offering keynotes. So the question is, number one, what steps or process do you go through to create a keynote that might just be a little bit different from a shorter speech, perhaps, if there's something over and above that you do, keeping in mind that most of the people here are Toastmasters and know about writing a short speech so specifically. So what steps or process do you go through? Please, Kingi. And for the lights, please, Mr. Timer, 2 to 3 minutes. Yellow light and then red light at 3. Thank you. Kingi.
Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the depth of talent that we have here in the room today. I'm looking forward not just to share, but also learning from everyone today. One of the first things that I do when I work on a keynote speech is I try and make it my own. So I don't call my speeches a keynote speech. I call it a Kingi note speech, because then I can personalize it. Because many times a keynote speech is out here somewhere, but what it is it's you with a lot of knowledge that you can share with other people in a structured way. So in the first instance, I I don't know if the word is personalize it, but I need to make it part of who I am. Now, the second thing, if I were to go to the really awesome speech that we've just heard, I don't know the difference between fan bake and fan grill. We just bought this new stove. I would like to know the difference between fan bake and fan grill so that I can really enjoy cooking my meals, but moreover, savoring the meals. Somebody in the Zoom knows the difference between fan bake and fan grill. They have some information that I dearly want. And in Toastmasters, we learn something really powerful, which helped move me from here to winning competition speeches, and that is a speech structure. Whether your speech is 3 minutes long or 3 hours long, it will still start with an introduction, 3 points, and a conclusion. We don't want more than 4 or 5 points, 3 points so that you can leave them with something for our people to take away. So when you look at something, let's say like a 20-minute speech, I break it up so that I can have an intro here, 3 points, and then an outro. By the end of that speech, the person that leaves knows what the difference between fan bake and fan grill is. Why does that matter? Because they'll be able to cook their next meal and enjoy it beautifully. So intro, 3 points, and an outro. Just break it up. So what it is that each point, it gives you more time to savor this, to help the person savor the information that you have. That's what it is. Whether it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes, 1 intro, 3 points, and an outro. And then that's the waka that you can put all your information into to sail the sea of communication and possibility to land into the heart of the person so that the heart can tell the spirit can tell the mind what they want, and then the mind can then tell the eyes and the hands so that they can do that thing that they have come to learn. That's what I call my Keynote speech. And of course, I do it in a way that's more authentic to me. I can't dance, so I won't dance on the stage, but I can move my hands around. I can tell a story, and that's really authentically Kingi. That's what I do. That's my little corridor for now. But those things, like you do in Toastmasters, when you write all of your speeches, it's just a bit longer. You have more time to help our whānau savor the information that you and only you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kingi. That's just so informative already. I can go now. I've got enough to take away, but I'm sure there's lots more to come. So next, I'd like to ask Giora, what is it that you do, the steps or the process that you might go through to create a keynote, please?
Thank you very much, Sheryl. In preparation for this session this afternoon, I researched. I thought to myself, how do I answer this question? So I researched the definition of a keynote speech. What does it mean to do a keynote speech? And as I Googled it, the one thing that came across again and again is keynote speech is the main event. It's the main speech in an event. And what that meant to me, and Kingi said it beautifully, is that a keynote speech is simply a speech which is the main point of the event. It can be a 2-minute speech, it can be a 7-minute speech, it can be a 15 or a 50-minute speech. And that means that, again, as Kingi said, the preparation is basically the same thing. It's deciding the topic, creating the structure of it, and working to create that speech. There are 2 things that I learned that are really, really important for me when I create keynote speeches. Obviously, the amount of time that I deliver the speech, or the amount of time that I am on stage, requires me to know more, to be more professional, and that means that I need to research more. If I do a 5-minute speech in Toastmasters, and again, Now, I'm not going to pick on Ange today. If I do a 5-minute speech in Toastmasters and I need to introduce a topic, the research is very much touching the surface because I only have 5 minutes. It's only about 600 words. But if I need to do the same speech for 50 minutes, then the research needs to be more in depth. So I spend a lot more time researching. The other thing that I think is really, really important and a big difference between possibly not so much the length of the speech, but a Toastmasters speech to a professional keynote speech is in Toastmasters, we kind of know the people around us. Even if we go into contests, we kind of know the people around us. When we get paid to speak, we need to research the audience. We need to know who it is that we're speaking to. We need to understand the audience. And I'll give you a quick example. I did a long time ago, I did a speech, a keynote speech, which started with a story of me waxing my legs. And I did it in various events, for various companies. And I learned that if I do the speech and 90% of the audience is male or are male or men, then I don't get any laughter because they don't really understand. So now whenever I go to deliver a speech and I want to use that specific speech as part of my speech, I ask to see how many female, the ratio of men and female in the audience. And if it's 50-50, the speech would work. But if it's more male to female, then the speech probably is not going to work. So a lot of research and researching the audience, I think, are the keys or the main differences between a shorter or a Toastmasters speech to a professional speech.
Thank you so much, Giora. Some great advice there as well. And now I'd like to ask Pritesh the same question. What are the steps or the process that you would go through to create a keynote?
Thank you, Sheryl. I'll just very quickly pick on one of the answers that Giora gave, and it's the importance of knowing your audience. Now, as I alluded to in my introduction, I found myself through Toastmasters, right? Which means writing speeches made me self-reflect, made me really dig deep and understand who I was and what my viewpoints on certain things were. And that's the flavor that I take up on when I'm on stage. My thing when I'm on stage is to make people self-reflect, is to make them realize what can make them a bit better leader, for example, what can make them more confident. So when you understand your audience, as Giora said, but my thing more is it just steps in a little deeper in the sense is I try and understand their emotion. I try and really see what is going on in their heads. Where are they sitting? What are they experiencing? Right? And that comes from research before your talk. And then I try and put myself, for example, if I want to take my listeners from A to B, I would start from the B being the conclusion, being the end. I start writing my speeches from the conclusion. How do I see my listeners moved? What are they taking from my talk? And then from there, I then start, okay, where are they? I try and meet them where they are. And a perfect analogy would be going from point A to point B, and you feed in the GPS your address, right? So you feed in the address, but all of a sudden it'll try and pick where you are. Only from where you are, then it maps a path. So when I'm writing speeches, that's exactly what I'm doing. I try and meet the audience where they are, and then slowly map a path to where I want to see them. Another classic example and something to add to it is an analogy would be taking a flight. When I'm writing my speech with the conclusion at the end, I have taken them from one destination to the other. And once they have landed at the destination, what are they seeing? What are they sensing? What are they feeling? What are they smelling? And if you picture all that, all of a sudden, as Kingi said, when you have that structure, like the structure of a house, right? Where you have a plan, you have a blueprint, and then you feed add bits in it to make it a proper house. Or in I normally, when I talk to people or coach, is have a skeleton. and then you put your tendons, your muscles, your flesh, and the end, which has to be the most powerful thing, is your breath. You give it breath, you make your speech come alive, and that's something they take. But apart from those 2 points, one thing that I'd like to add is putting in their memorable things that they can take away. Again, when I say self-reflection, people will forget what I say. Maybe they'll remember what I said 2 days or maximum 5 days, but they will not forget how I made them feel when I was speaking. So Kingi can't dance, but I can dance. So I normally get people, even when I'm emceeing or speaking, to stand up and dance and just feel in the moment. So bring them out of the subconscious mind into the conscious mind. So again, who you are, you bring those unique elements into your speech, and you work with your audience that way. So as you prepare, I would say those would be my building onto what has been said would be my points. Thank you, Sheryl.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Pritesh. Again, some great tips. These are going to be wonderful things for me to take away. And now, Lauren, can we ask for you to also share the steps and process that you might want to add to these things as well? And make sure you unmute yourself.
Absolutely. I just echo what everyone said, but also just to perhaps add some detail, I made a quick jotted list of the 4 things that I would do. So number 1 is start with the audience. So in my work, I spend a lot of time asking my client, who is normally the HR manager of an organization, so what are the key things that you want the team to come away with after this session? And I tend to ask that same question in a few different ways. So for yourself, if you're doing a speech perhaps for Toastmasters, think about who is your audience, because everything that you do has got to be all about the audience. You have knowledge, but it's about thinking, how is this knowledge going to help them, inspire them? And this flows into number 2, which is, what is my key message? And what is the action that I want the audience to take? And or how do I want the audience to feel? You know, as Pritesh said, as Maya Angelou once said, people forget what you said and what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So I think once you understand who your audience is, and if you don't have a client to ask your friends, ask your fellow club members. Say, if I was going to do a speech about ovens, what would you want to know about? And they might give you questions that you haven't thought of, so you can start to look at it from the audience's point of view. So number 1 is audience. Number 2 is, what's your key message and the action you want them to take? Number 3, I'd think about, okay, what are my key points? And I love panels because we can differ in opinions. So a bit different for me perhaps, but unlike what Kingi said, I often do have more than 3 points. Oh, gasp. Totally agree that for a 7-minute speech, and any speech actually, you can just have 1 main point. But I often, because I do 90-minute workshops, will have up to 9 key points, for example. I might have 9 key steps and ideas around practical things you could do to alleviate stress and anxiety, for example. So whatever I decide, there's no fixed number. I think there's no right or wrong. But whatever my key points are, number 4 is I want to come up with a compelling story for each of those points. Stories, I think, are we're just wired for stories, aren't we? I mean, Kingi, again, started his little introduction with a story. I did it to a certain extent as well, to say, how is a shy and sporty kid? So we listen in, our ears lean in when we hear a story. So I would think when you're structuring a keynote speech, you might feel like, well, I'm used to running 7 minutes. How do I pad it out to 20? 20 minutes is amazing because it gives you so much time to tell 3 really great stories. It's almost like 3 mini speeches that you already know how to write, and you're just wrapping it together. So you might have the key area, 1 key point, the story and the analogy, and then what that means. And then you repeat that again, the story, the analogy, what that means, and then you do that again. So I think creating a story bank is a great idea as you're writing speeches. Stories can come from anywhere. I was just out pruning my vine earlier, my grapevine, and I was there thinking about how, this has got so many great analogies. You know, the harder that I prune it back, the more it's going to blossom next year, to a point. I mean, if I go too hard, then it's not going to produce grapes. So anywhere in life, there are opportunities for you to find stories, either taking your own stories or stories you've heard, which obviously you want to reference. But I think for me, that's the key thing. Figure out what the audience wants from you and what's the key goal. What are your what's your key message, the key points, and then the stories that you're going to use. And then the last thing, actually number 5, is for me, I would then put together my slides. And so I'd only do that once I'd actually mapped out the key parts of my message. And so then I'd start to design some slides. And just a little word on slides, aim to have little or no words or single lines, if at all. Don't make your slides death by PowerPoint where you're reading off the slide. Head to somewhere like pixabay.com, pixabay.com, where you can get free, royalty-free images that you can put up full screen on your slides and make them really visual and appealing, and they can help step through your speech. So that's my little process. Back to you, Sheryl.
Thank you so much, Lauren. What fantastic tips we've got here. So personalize it, make it your own, do the research for the speech, and also research your audience. Know what it is that you need to know about them, male, female, young, old, whatever it might be. But also research what the audience wants. What's the takeaway? If it's a company, what do they want their people to learn or take away? And on that topic of takeaway, they're probably going to forget everything you said anyway, but they're not going to forget how you made them feel. So whether you're going to dance or whether you're going to include a compelling story, a memorable story, that's what they're probably going to remember. But have your key points, whether it's 3 or 9, depending on how long you've got, you'll have a different way to do it. And a last thought, slides. Make them interesting, but don't do them till you get to the end, because then the slides will determine the speech rather than, no, the slides will be determined after the speech purpose and information has been put in place. Thank you, everybody. All right, so let's have a look. Now, this is a little bit of a difficult one that I wonder about. I can do 5 to 7 minutes, but gee, how do I pad it out to 30 minutes, an hour and a half? How do I get content to fill into a keynote? So can we start with Giora this time, please? How do you create a longer speech? And how do you remember what you're going to do and say?
Again, it comes back to research. I create a longer speech by doing more research. I will have, and I think Lauren has touched on this, you have more stories. There are more things that you incorporate into your speech in order to make it longer, more content to make it, to beef it up. So the more research in incorporating more stories is usually what I do. In terms of how do I remember it, if it's a brand new speech, I just really memorize it word for word. I spend days on days and days until I remember everything word for word. And when I feel that I'm ready, when I know everything, when I can stop in the middle of the speech and then start without being confused, then that's when I know everything is memorized and everything is proper. So that's how I do the research, or how I beef the content, and now how I memorize everything. You need to unmute yourself, Sheryl.
Yes, my turn now. So Pritesh, how do you manage to remember a much longer speech? What tools might you use?
Right, thank you, Sheryl. Yes, so definitely research, knowing your material. But apart from just that, with the way I work, with the way I operate in my message about self-confidence and how to be the better version of you, I try and become my message, in the sense when what I'm talking about, I really need to be passionate about. My purpose is really that, and I'm passionate about what I'm talking. So in that way, what makes it easier for me to remember is I know the message, because I have lived my message and I'm living my message, so to speak. But at the same time, it's about a lot of practice is also put into it, right? 1 minute on stage is probably equivalent to at least 2 to 3 days of preparation. And the way I remember is with that structure that Kingi talked about in the beginning. I try and make it into 3. If I have 3 points, then they are my 3 mini speeches, right? So I'm practicing my one piece with my story. Again, because it's my story, I don't have to practice as much. However, I have to rehearse. Now, there's a difference between practice and rehearse, which I probably don't think we'll have time to go into, but do look into it. So when you have put your point forward, as this is what you are talking about, now get your or a story that you're really familiar about, which doesn't need you to memorize as much, right? And then the same goes for 2 and 3. Now, practicing, the way I normally work is when I have a speech can probably take me a month, because I get a draft and then it becomes an organic or a living thing, because as I'm living my life, things drop that I could adjust or put in or make my speech better. So in terms of getting 20 minutes sounds like a lot, but when you get on stage, 20 minutes literally flies. But yes, so 3 points, 3 mini speeches. And one of the things I do, because it's around your personal confidence, it's around making you a better version of yourself, I throw questions to the audience. My speeches, it's not a speech. It is a speech, but I make it a conversation. My speaking style is very dialogue based, where I'm asking questions, I'm getting them to interact with me. And probably 2 questions can take away 5 to 7 minutes just like that, because you're throwing questions around the room, you're getting feedback and trying to answer. But one thing I don't do, and again, like I said, this is a panel, we don't have to agree because each thing works for each other, is I try and not memorize word for word, because I'm, again, conversational rather than script based and focusing on what I should say next, as I'm opposed to reading the room and working with the room and my message. So that's something that comes with experience. But if you can start working with that, with interaction with your audience in your message, then it makes it easy, and that 20 minutes just flies by. Thank you, Sheryl.
Some great tips. Thanks, Pritesh. Lauren, would you like to share how you would go about remembering such a long speech, please?
Absolutely, yes. And for the majority of the work that I do, I don't try to memorize word for word anything that I share, because it's so important that we don't sound scripted or stilted. However, there are 2 examples when I have done that. One was my TED Talk. So I did a TED Talk in 2018 and TEDx Oneonta in New York, which was 18 minutes. And that's the first time in my life, really, that I actually learned word for word a speech of that length. And I knew exactly what I wanted to say at each part. There were 7 stories and anecdotes through it. And I thought I'd give you a really practical way of the way that I did that I helped to remember it. And I actually shared about it in the Toastmaster magazine. Remember, we used to get these lovely hard copies of them. So if you want to Google it, or I think our Zoom master might put the link in the chat. It's the March 2019 magazine. And in here, I talked about my 18 make or break minutes. And yeah, it was absolutely exhilarating, but also terrifying going to do this speech. The way that I memorized it, because that's what I need to do for that, but you could also use this to loosely know your speech, is that I actually pictured where I wanted to be. And so a real quick 101 lesson on stage usage is that, when we read a book, we read from this side to this side, right? We read from left to right. And so this is the past and this is the future. And so over my right shoulder and also down here, this is where I want to talk about things in the past, or the negatives, or the things that I don't want people to do. And up over here is where I want to talk about my idea of, hey, you could snack on exercise. When I talk about a research study, I referred over here to the not so great side of the study. And over here, I talked about how they did little 20-second sprints and it boosted their energy. When I talked about being chained to my desk, I was over at this side, at the back of the stage. And then I knew that I wanted to come to the center position for my, power position for a key point. And I knew I was going to be over here talking about the positives. So when I practiced the speech, and I think there is a difference between practicing and rehearsing, but I practiced it and I actually videoed myself over and over again, going start to finish, whether I made a mistake or not, because on the day you're going to make mistakes, that's okay. And I really had mapped out where I wanted to be. And so that one, it helped me to know gave me time as I walked over here. It would just kind of, the words would come and I think, oh, that's right, I'm going to talk about this. Well, that's right, I'm going to be here to share that example of my client did this. So I think that's hopefully a practical idea for you. Really good way to use the stage is to think about 3 positions. And if you tell a story here, then you can refer back to the hologram of that story later on. It was like, oh, I was at home in the shower, and then you can be like, well, that was going on in the shower, you know, and when I was in my desk, and you can be like, don't be stuck at your desk. Does that make sense? So it's really great to use the space when you're practicing and tag different parts of your speech to where you're going to be. Wouldn't recommend trying to learn it all word for word. Yes, know what your opening line is going to be, and yes, know what your key close might be. But in the middle, just know how you want to share those stories and where you want to be for each one. If you're telling a sad story, don't then later on and go to that same point on the stage and tell another uplifting story in the same spot, because the audience will be feeling really out of balance about that. Choose where you're going to be. And again, if you've got something that's past and then present and future, you can use the stage really well for that. So hopefully those are some ideas on helping to remember a speech. And at the end of the day, if you don't get it word perfect, that's actually okay, because people will relate as well. Thanks, Sheryl.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a relief to know we don't have to remember all of it word for word, unless, of course, we're on a TEDx. Kingi, do you have some special tips that you can share with us to help us to remember a much longer story?
Oh, this is like an exam I used to have in the 7th form, and all I have to say is D, all of the above. Really awesome learnings. We have an ancestor by the name of Hinemoa. Hinemoa lived on the side of Lake Rotorua. She fell in love with this handsome man by the name of Tutanekai, who lived on Makoia Island. Makoia Island is the island in the middle of Lake Rotorua. Tutanekai came from the father of Hinemoa was the senior line of that area, and he didn't want Hinemoa to marry Tutanekai. So he knew that one night she was going to steal away on a canoe and then head over to Makoia to be with Tutanekai. So that night he got all his men to drag the canoes in so Hinemoa couldn't get there. So what Hinemoa did was that she wore calabashes as a flotation device. Then the story goes she swam to Rotorua. Why I'm telling you this story is that people think that Hinemoa swam that whole distance from the shore all the way to Makoia. You see, at the time there were these, we call them tumu. They are these poles, these huge poles, which were markers that our iwi or our family, our whānau, would put into the lake and say, this is my fishing area. You cannot swim here. You cannot get fish here. Hinemoa knew where those tumu were. So all she did was that she swam to one pole and then she had a rest. Then she swam to the next pole. Ooh, then she had another rest and she swam to all of these poles. They could have called it Poland. Now, and it took her to Makoia Island. And when I share my journey, as we were talking about earlier with the Google Maps, is that I have little signposts that I take myself to when I give my speech. And I'm lucky, I'm like Lauren, I too have a story bank, but I'm lucky I get to tell those stories all the time as the nature of my work in terms of what we call mātauranga Māori knowledge. So I get to live it, I can see it, I can hear it, I can breathe it, and then I'm also able through Toastmasters and my broadcasting history to be able to help the people that I'm talking to see what I see. But I need to take some signposts to get there. Myself, as I say, I live the stories, but then there are those who need to read every word. Kia kaha to you. And so I think that's what all of us are saying, to each their own. As long as we get to tell our stories in a way that we use a signpost, okay, I finished this story. Here's that signpost there, which takes me to the next story, and so on and so on. Lauren, thank you. You've given me like a quantum leap from 3 speeches, could be more now. Though it's just freed me up to do that. But as long as I know, like the ferryman, where I am going, our whānau that we talk to will know where I'm going to. Because half the time when people don't know where we're going, they're wondering, where am I going? And they're not focusing to what's been spoken. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Kingi. That's some great advice and really good advice from everybody. So it seems there's not necessarily one hard and fast way to do it. Some people like to memorize everything, others just those signposts along the way. But it seems the important thing is the stories, the connection with those stories, being real, lived stories. And let's face it, if that's part of our life, we know it. So we don't necessarily have to remember all the details. And the good piece of advice, if you get it wrong, nobody else knows. It doesn't matter. So excellent, excellent. Thank you. All right. So the last one for these, for everybody, I would like to now start with Pritesh. And how do you keep the audience engaged, especially if it's a long keynote? How do you stop them from not going off on their phones or letting their mind disappear or chatting to the person next to them? And I suppose, especially if it happened to be on Zoom, where we could very easily be looking away or doing our emails. So Pritesh, would you like to give us some tips? How do we keep the audience engaged when it's a longer speech?
Sure. Thanks, Sheryl. Yes, I think these days, almost everyone says they are zoomed out, right? So when preparing your keynote, please incorporate some audience engagement, because it's very difficult to be sitting and just listening for even 20 minutes. I think personally, in the beginning, 2-3 minutes into a speech, I would fizzle off, because the mind is now wired so much with all these things around us that it's very hard to just sit and listen and only listen. So I would say definitely when preparing a speech, incorporate audience engagement. Now, this is your definite go-tos. Right. So it could be a question that you pose to a group. In Zoom now we have breakout rooms where you can have you go into your group and have a little discussion. So first thing is try and incorporate some group activity in your keynote. Now, my second thing is, and as Sheryl said, people could be doing different things, right? So now you have to be vigilant. You have to have the ability to read the room. That's a skill, because a lot of times you are so busy just delivering, and half the people have fallen asleep. So as soon as you see maybe, okay, one yawn is fine. If you see 2 or 3 other yawns, you know you need to do something. So that's something I normally say, that when you're doing a speech, I try not memorize it word for word, because these are the moments where you can quickly then just throw a question and ask an audience something, because all of a sudden they're falling half asleep. I think someone's microphone is not unmuted today, but that's okay. Sorry. Throw a question to your audience and just draw them in, because all of a sudden, even if they're 20% awake, you call out their name in a meeting, they are 100% awake. So that's another way of keeping the audience engaged. And just go throughout the room. Maybe eye contact is really important. Now, this is one of the basics we learn in Toastmasters. That's one way, a very simple way of keeping your audience engaged. Just looking and maybe being stationary at one point for 30-40 seconds, because then it means you are looking at that person. Another simple way is using names and what has been discussed in the meeting. So for example, you'd have noticed, and almost all of us in the panel, as I was speaking, I picked up on what Kingi said, just mentioned his name. I picked up on what Lauren said. Now, all of a sudden, just using their name quickly draws them to be with you again. And you are still in control. You haven't given the floor to them to say something, but just quickly calling their name. And the last thing that I as an MC do, and that's something that's quite important, is at the start, you draw your audience to you, because as you get on stage, people have sort of drifted away from you already. You need to bring them to you, right? So what do you do in your introduction that pulls them to you? So it could be a question, it could be a startling stat, or anything like that. I normally get people to dance. Like I said, it's easy, it's in me. So all of a sudden, whatever they have been thinking, they have come into the room straight away. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Pritish. Some great tips there. That's excellent. So Lauren, have you got some tips for us to keep the audience engaged?
Yeah, I love everything that Pritish has said. I think I'll talk to two things. One is the engagement online. We are doing a lot of things on Zoom. And the amazing thing about Zoom is I'm not zoomed out. I use Zoom all the time. I've been using it for years. But you can actually have more engagement on Zoom. Not today, because the chat isn't set up so that everyone can use it. But normally right now, I'd be inviting you all to say, type in the chat for me, where are you from? Whereabouts in the country are you from? What's been the best thing about your day? You know, you're just using it and that sort of thing. And throughout all of my online speeches, which has been probably 75% of my work over the last 2.5 years, I'm using the chat throughout, even just getting people to say, yes, are you with me on that? Is that okay? Or I might do a breathing exercise and get them to count their breaths per minute and get them to put it in the chat. And then we'll do an exercise and then we'll do it again and put it in the chat. So all the way through, people are having to respond. Also recommend online trying to get everyone to have their cameras on, because then they're much more engaged as well, although I realise issues with bandwidth sometimes. So lots of ways to keep your audience engaged. Same thing in person. You want to open with something really engaging. And there's lots of ways to do that. I think that the key thing, though, that keeps audiences engaged is taking people on that emotional roller coaster, being able to share messages in a way that leaves people uplifted and inspired, but also have moments that are maybe more solemn as well, but that touch people. So, for example, in my TED talk, I shared about how I always remember the day when I was just sitting in a pile of tears and my daughter comes in and says, "Mummy, what's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, I've just got off the phone to the doctor and I've just had some bad news." And at that time, I was 7 months pregnant and I just been told that I had gestational diabetes, and that both me and this unborn child now had a higher risk of developing diabetes later in life. So I was just devastated. So I don't know how that hit you just then, me just dropping that out of a context. But probably a part of you might have felt some empathy for me in that moment. Now, I do go on in my speech, and feel free to watch the TED Talk, just Google it, look up Lauren Parsons' TED Talk or Snack on Exercise, and you'll hear that there was a happy ending to that story. But having that contrast is so important, because a lot of what I do is motivational, is inspirational. But if everything is all up here the whole time, people come away feeling like it was a bit monotone. Another small example is I've been speaking a lot this year on dealing with stress and anxiety during uncertainty. And one of my 9 keys is laughter. Now, I know that you've all heard that before, right? You know that laughter is the best medicine. So I could say that and you could go, "Oh yeah, I know that, I've heard that before." So what I do intentionally when I introduce that point is I always say, "Now, I don't want you to think this is just flippant or not important." And so I share how at the start of 2020 was the first time in my life that I lost someone that I loved to suicide. And how my husband and I spent a week with that family, just a really tough week, with this beautiful couple who were mourning the loss of their son and the father of their grandchildren. And how what struck me that week was that while there were lots of tears every day, every single day there was also laughter. And so I hope, again, as I share that with you, that just lands with you and you can see what that does in terms of how you feel responding to that. So if I just talked about laughter being good and positive, you might just brush it off. But if I can bring home to you how and why it's important and hopefully take you on a journey, that's what's going to really keep your audience engaged. Sheryl.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for taking us on that journey, demonstrating what you were talking about. Kingi, would love to hear how you feel you can keep the audience engaged. How can we learn something for when it's a longer speech?
Cool. I use, well, thank you very much. And to our, wow, this is awesome. I wish I had a piece of pen and paper and I can write everything down, because it just makes us, the ability to the ability to be flexible and the ability to allow yourself to be contributed to, I think, is to be like a bamboo. To be is that a bamboo, when the wind blows everywhere, runs with the wind, but doesn't. It's not like a tōtara tree who's staunch and straight and then just falls over. Because sometimes, if you know, it's just like Pritesh was saying, I've seen in a comedy show in Wellington a man who was bombing. He's one of my favorite comedians. He was bombing in his comedy show, and then halfway through he realized that, so he stopped and he said, "I'm going to take another tack," and he took another tack, and he continued. It was probably he had a standing ovation before at the end. And I think that goes to show us that we are here for the people. It goes back to what Lauren was saying. And if things aren't going well, it's okay to move to somewhere else that's a bit more closer to where our people are. In terms of what I actually do, physically do with, if you look at Te Ao Māori, when you go onto a marae, I can put it that way, when you go onto a marae, you have speakers, and on both sides. In our iwi, the first speaker comes from the tangata whenua, from the people of the land, and they don't talk about the reason that they're there. They just talk about about people that they know from the area of the people that have come. The first speaker doesn't talk about the reason that they're there either from the visitors. They talk about their connections. The second speaker doesn't talk about it. They talk about the actual whakapapa genealogical connections. Like if horo whenua and te aro were to come together, we would start creating those networks, that whakawhanaungatanga, creating that network of relatedness. And then once that occurs, then they start talking about what is the reason that we're here. And that's one of the beautiful things that we have. I could see it from everyone, from Lauren, from everybody. And where New Zealanders are really awesome. That's why I think I won half the time, because we like to relate to people. We talk to people. We don't go like, and I don't mean to put anyone down. And I'll really apologize. I've never said, "Hi, how are you? How are you?" And everybody's supposed to say good or hi. I like to take out Kingi. Kingi on stage is the same as Kingi on the Zoom, is the same as Kingi on Facebook, is because the messages are the same. You can give us the same messages to talk about, but our experiences, our stories, our way of life, the way we see things is the difference. And that's not only is it the knowledge we have, but how we see that knowledge. And the only way that I can do that is to share from Kingi to the person, people talking to people. That's what it's all about for me. Kingi talking to you with all this knowledge I have, with all the research, and sharing that information. That's how I do it, is that I want to connect. We need to create a connection, like whānau in the first instance, and then secondly, be brave to say to myself, I'm bombing, I need to change, or B, this is doing really, really well. They're getting that kai that they need. How can I continue?
Thank you, Kingi. Fantastic. Great tips. Giora, would you like to share your tips, please?
Of course, I would love to share my tips. I want to start with this. I think it's really, really important for all of us to understand that we can be the best speakers in the world. At about 15 minutes into our speech, people are going to disconnect. And it's a fact. We can be the best speakers in the world. At about 15 minutes, people begin to disengage with us, especially if we deliver a speech after lunch or around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where people start to doze off, and that's Zoom and in person as well. So it's something that we need to accept as speakers, that part of the audience is going to disconnect, and there's nothing that we can do much to keep them engaged. In saying that, everything that everybody has spoken about, brilliant. So speaking to the audience, engaging with them, asking questions, whether it's Zoom or not. With Zoom, I think one of the things that we underutilize a lot in Zoom is using the camera to get closer to the audience. And it in a way it scares people a little bit, but it gets them to pay attention to the things that we do. So actually using the camera, getting closer and further away, engages people. And obviously the breakout rooms, the chat, Mentimeter, all of those things really help with Zoom. Lauren spoke about the laughter. I use a lot of humor in my speech, especially self-depreciating humor. People love to laugh to laugh when it's making fun of myself. Changing of pace. So up to now I spoke really quickly, but there's a time, and Lauren demonstrated it as well, that I'll slow down. And just that change of pace, well, I'll speak slowly for a short period of time, and then I'll speak it up again. Then that people go, what's going on? And they really pay attention to what's happening. What else did I write down? That's it. Humor, engaging with the audience, and again, I think in Zoom, just the understanding how to use the camera, getting closer and staying away from it is really important as well.
Thank you, Giora. Are we all awake out there? Hello, everybody awake? Okay, lunch was a while over. I won't make you stand up and exercise, or
maybe we could get Pritish to do a dance or something, Pat.
We should have a dance. We should have a dance.
Pritesh has this thing when he makes us take the tongues out. So
oh yes, we could.
Yeah, we can do a warm up.
All right, I've got one more question for each of the panelists. Just one question each, something more specific to what it is that they've done or do. For the timing, please, Mr. Timekeeper, BJ, just 2 to 3 minutes, because we want to have a bit of time at the end for some quick other questions. So not the 4 to 5, can we just have it 2 to 3 minutes, please, Mr. Timer? And hopefully he's there and he picked that up. So I'm going to start with Lauren. He did get that. Thank you, Mr. Timer. So Lauren, you talked about being a TEDx presenter, and I'm just wondering if there's any other tips. You did touch on that, which was really useful, but any other tips you'd like to give us, especially if people may think that perhaps TEDx might be something they'd like to try. Would you like to offer us some suggestions?
Sure. So highly recommend go for it. If you have an idea that you think could be on a TED Talk, then go for it. Usually it's an application process, and then you need to, oh, somebody's sharing the screen. There we go. So if you want to, do head to have a look at the article, which I think they'll put in the chat, so you can look at that later on, and you can read my tips around that. But the key difference between a TED Talk and a Toastmasters talk is that in TED, you just want to have one idea. So it's all about having that one idea. So my idea was to snack on exercise in short bursts you can easily fit into your day. And it was all about boosting your brain, body, and mood. And it is something that I want to create a global revolution around, because I just see so many of us are down and depressed. And I believe that it is not the total, but it is a very key part of the solution to that, and so accessible and free. So I think that's the key with a TED Talk, is that it can't be a motivational speech as such. It might be motivating, but it's not the purpose of the speech. It's all about the idea. So when you're thinking of applying to do a TED Talk, you need to refine your idea, and you want to be able to really share it in 7 words or less. I worked with an amazing coach, Terry Kingston, T-E-R-I. She's a distinguished Toastmaster and Toastmaster in Ottawa, Canada. And she was amazing. And she coached me and helped me to really distill all of my ideas and everything I wanted to fit in there to just one idea. And I share about it in the article that it was a bit like, she calls it killing your darlings. When you've written this amazing part of the speech and you've got this fantastic story and you've still got too much content, so it has to go. So I think if you want to do a great TED Talk, have one clear idea. Definitely go for it, apply. Let me know if you're happy to help or answer questions if anyone's interested in following that process. There are lots of TED Talk and TEDx's around New Zealand, and have that idea. And it's not so much about you, it's about your idea that will get you on the stage, and then it's up to you to deliver. Thanks, Sheryl.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a great bit of information. All right, Kingi, so you've also worked in other areas besides what we've talked about, radio announcer, TV presenter. Is there any tips that you could give people for those particular areas that might differ a little bit from a keynote speech?
Cool. Yep, thank you. Firstly, I want to acknowledge everybody again. There were 2 things I think that I would like to share. The first thing is with being a television presenter or a radio announcer. It's like, especially if I put it this way, is that for a small period of time, for however long the whānau are watching television or listening to radio, they are inviting you into their space. It's like I might be invited into their lounge by them watching the TV. I may be invited into their car by my voice being on the radio, and to treat that with the respect and the honor that it is given to you. It's not a responsibility, I believe. It's not a piece of pressure, but it's an opportunity that for such a small period of time, you have an ability to make somebody's day or to touch somebody, to move them. When you are giving a TEDx speech, whether you are giving an MC for a wedding, whether you have 2 or 3 minutes in front of a group, that indeed is the honor that you are given. So as a radio announcer, I look for what are the right words that I need to say in the short period of time, so that it's able to travel along the electricity lines and to arrive with the audience, so that they're moved, so they don't have to, so they can start, finish, or continue their day with something powerful or inspirational. The second thing is that the beauty of radio and television, it actually gets you to focus on not just the message, but the delivery of the message. Sometimes on radio, they cannot see my hands. And sometimes on radio, all I have are my words. So it means that not only it's about the delivery, it's about the pronunciation of the words, so that I'm able, so that people are able to catch it. Unfortunately, these days I watch Netflix and everything, I have to have subtitles, so that because I can't hear what they're saying, because people speak quite quickly. But when I get the subtitles, even though I get the with the subtitles, it means that I can get the message, the juicy power of the message, and not have to think, what was that they said? And that could be a really powerful line that I've missed out on. 2 things, again, is that it's an honor to be invited into the space of the group of people that we're talking to. And secondly, with that honor, it's our awesome responsibility to deliver the message, and the way we do that also is about how we pronounce our words, to ensure it's not what we say, it's what lands is the most important thing. Yeah, so that all your research and everything can be grabbed, taken hold of, and to sustain our audience, our whānau that we haven't met yet, those ones that we are cooking an awesome recipe of information, inspiration for. That's me.
Thank you, Kingi. Thank you very much. And Giora, as a facilitator and a coach, is there differences that you find perhaps when you're facilitating a smaller group in comparison to, say, a speech or a keynote?
I find, and I don't know how many, obviously everybody here are Toastmasters, but I don't know how many of you have gone to speak to a club, and you walked into the club and there were 4 members in the club, and you had to deliver your speech to 4 members. And I find that speaking to a very small group of people is much more scary. It's very intimate. You're very close to them. When I'm on stage and I speak to 100, more than 100 people, then it's a big audience, and it's different. I feel more free. But in a small environment, it's so much closer. Everything that people do or act, you catch on it really quickly, and it's very hard. So I find that speaking to a small audience, because of the intimate atmosphere, it's different, and it changes the way that I will deliver a speech or a training or facilitate. It's more it goes more into to coaching. There's more questioning, there's more doing assignments, there's more back and forth rather than me standing, hey, I'm the best in the world, I know everything, now you sit down and listen. It doesn't work this way. I invite people to ask me questions. One of the things that I love to do when I do training sessions, and that's with different types of salespeople, is that I invite them to challenge what I say. I start my sessions by saying, look, as the session goes on, please ask me questions. I don't care how important or insignificant you think the question is, please ask me questions. And not only that, if there's anything that I say during today's training that you disagree with, please bring it up so we can talk about it, so we can get the discussion. And I find that it helps them participate. It helps them, it brings them confidence into taking their part of the training session, of asking questions and raising their hand and being part of the training rather than just sitting back and listening. So those are a few things that I do, inviting people to participate, asking them to challenge. It's also, again, it's the beginning of the session today, we spoke about the importance of researching your audience. I focus, my business is real estate only, real estate salespeople. That's my niche. And if I train a group of experienced salespeople, then they already know the business. So the training is more about them doing things and them talking to each other and getting them to do the activity, because they learn not just from me, but they learn a lot from each other through doing things, role plays, chasing each other, all of those things. But if it's a group of new salespeople, then it's more me speaking and passing on information. So again, understanding the audience, understanding who it is that we're talking to is really important. I am out of time, so just again, invite questions. Do let people know that their opinion is important, and research your audience.
Thank you, Giora. That's some really good tips. Now, this next question, I feel I should have asked this before we started today, because I'm hoping the answers aren't too different from what I've been doing. Pritesh, as an MC, can you tell us perhaps how that might differ from a keynote? What are some important things you might be able to share with us? And don't forget to take yourself off mute. That might be number one tip. Remember to take yourself off mute.
Excellent. Thank you, Sheryl. I must say you are doing an amazing job facilitating this. One thing you did brilliantly, and it's a master skill for an MC, is being cognizant of time, being aware of time. How I realized how quickly from 5 minutes, you've brought it down to 2-minute talks around this 2 to 3 minutes. Now, as an MC, you have to be very aware of what's happening around you. Like reading the room. I always say just to get things into context, there's a lot of demand for MCs. My plan was, because I wanted to be a motivational speaker 5 years ago to 5 years later. So what I thought, I'll be an MC, it'll give me a chance to stand into a room full of brand new people and to learn to master the skills of speaking. Little did I know, now we are doing 80 to 100 MC events a year. Right? And I have a full-time job. So can you imagine the demand there? But what happens is when you are asked to ever take the Toastmasters role in your meetings, do it. Put your hand up. That's a great way to build all the capabilities and tips and tricks for being an MC, because literally that's what you are doing. One of the key skills again for MCing, and that's something we haven't touched on today as a speaker, is your listening ability. That's a huge part of communication, which I know Toastmasters promotes quite a lot, but outside people think communication is just talking, but a huge part is listening. As an MC, good listening skills really help, especially when you are transitioning from one event or one speaker to the other. How quickly you can take one or two things, formulate into a nice transition, link to the next person, and boom, the next person goes. So listening skills is absolutely vital. confidence. You are there as the face of the event. However, you need to do it with a servant heart. And again, that's something Toastmasters does. As Kingi mentioned, it's an honor to get invited into people's personal events like weddings. We do a lot of weddings and personal parties. How privileged it is for someone to invite you into their inner circle, into the inner space. So you take that humility, yet still stand there, be firm, be the leader, because everyone looks up to the MC, right? So how you do it, that's again, you can build that in Toastmasters. And my last thing, because I have a huge list I can go through, but the key thing is crisis management. You gotta be so quick on your feet, yet smiling and appearing absolutely gentle on stage as if nothing's going wrong, and having plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, even till the last minute, or even when things are happening, you need to be very quick to improvise so that your targets are met. Thank you, Sheryl.
Thank you so much, Pritesh. And thank you, everybody. Absolutely. I have taken away so many gems here, so many worthwhile things. Now, I'm very cognizant of time, and we had hoped to have some time for questions. I might just see if we've got one or two, although if any of our panel needs to leave now, I appreciate that I've already taken you over time. If you can stay for one or two questions, wonderful. Yep, but I do understand if you have to go and that you have something already booked straight after, which Pritesh I know does have. So thank you, Pritesh. If you do need to go now, certainly love everything that you've shared with us today. Is there any last words you want to say before you go?
No, it's been my honor. Thank you. And Sheryl, thank you for inviting me. I have learned so much as well. Thank you, everyone.
So much. Thank you.
Cheers. Have a good one. Thank you.
So I'd like to ask our moderator then, if you've got a couple of questions. We've got three of our panel here. Maybe there's one question for each person, perhaps.
I've got a couple of questions here. One is, what extra do you do when designing a keynote speech if you have the after lunch or dinner speaking slot? So do you treat that differently in any way?
You're on mute, Sheryl.
If someone wants to put their hand up to answer that one, if you've got an answer, then please do. Or I could throw it at someone. Okay, hands up who's done an after lunch or an after dinner one. All right, Giora, how about you answer this one then, please?
If this wasn't Toastmaster, I'd say that I take off my clothes and then people pay attention, but it's Toastmaster, so I cannot say that. A lot of humor, change of pace, engagement, and getting people to do stuff. If people at 1:30 in the afternoon have to sit on their bottom for half an hour and just listen to me, they're falling asleep. But if about 10 minutes into my speech, I get them to do something, then it wakes them up for another 15 minutes, and then another 15 minutes later, I'll get them to do something else, interact with them, and it keeps them going through the keynote period without falling asleep and dribbling all over their clothes.
Well, here's hoping when nobody's dribbling out there now. Thank goodness most of the cameras are off, perhaps. Thanks, Giora. What else have we got there, Neil?
Of a similar nature, what's the best way to handle a keynote on a very broad-based technical subject? So if it's technical, how would you handle it differently?
All right. So Kingi or Lauren, have you needed to do something technical that you've got some tips for?
Not especially. I don't know if you have, Kingi, but certainly I have audiences who are more analytical, you know, people that work at the Treasury, for example. And so I always try to make sure that, like my parents are both scientists, and so I really believe in researching and referencing. So I haven't done a technical speech, but I think it's really important that you do your research and reference. Something to add, Kingi?
No, I have nothing to add. I think the only thing I do in my technical speeches would be within how it relates to my tauranga Māori. I just need to ensure that I translate, not in terms of te ao Māori, but that at the end of each point I make, it's very much like an instruction manual. I need to ensure that the person that I'm talking to or the people that I'm talking to understand what I'm talking about and also know how to actually use that piece of information in the way that they, in their everyday job. So I usually end up with a couple of examples.
Great idea. And Giora, you've got something too?
I think that the fact that its speech needs to be very technical, not technological, but technical, doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be different. I think with technical speeches, we have two options. The first one is, hey, look, here's the data, and here's the data, and here's the data, and here's the data, and everybody goes after 5 minutes. Or we can go, here's the data, and here's a story. Here's the data, and here's the story, or here's the story, and here's the data. So we can still incorporate everything that we've spoken about before into a technical speech. It doesn't need to be just data. And I think if we do it that way, the speech will be a very good speech.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Great tips there. Neil, do we have one more that we can end on?
It's more a statement that you might like to discuss. Professional speakers can adapt speeches, whereas the average Toastmaster member will write a new speech. I don't know if there's any comment you'd like to make around that.
Very good comment. Thoughts?
What was the question again? Sorry.
I don't know if I've understood it right, but I think if you're inferring that if professional speakers are just adapting what they're doing, I think I definitely do that. I test out and try out 7-minute segments of my longer speeches at Toastmasters, and I just am so thankful and grateful to Toastmasters for creating this amazing opportunity. And I just love the fact that we are constantly giving feedback in such an uplifting way. But I think that also there are stories everywhere. And I've heard great speeches about how to make cheese and about how the internet came about, and just such a variety through to inspiring speeches like the ones that we see in the world champs of international world champs of public speaking. So I think there are topics everywhere, and I would recommend grab yourself a notebook and start creating a story bank for yourself of ideas. That's my 2 cents on that.
Great tips. Great. And Giora and Kingi, anything else you want to add to that before we wind up?
I do the same thing, Lauren. I will practice my stories, the actual stories, and work on them, get feedback within my own Toastmasters group, because it's right. We get this rough diamond, but when we get to work on it with those like-minded and in our clubs, are able to make it really, really shine in that space. I also like to add that I think for me, one of my favorite Toastmaster speeches was about Brussels sprouts. It was just about, I don't like Brussels sprouts, but after that speech, I love Brussels sprouts. She told me how to cook and what you do at the top, because that's what a speech is. It's a message or a how to or this or that being communicated to us so that we're able to do it as well. Just like today, I really do. I would really love to know the difference between fan bake and fan grill, and now know what I'm going to do when we go get a stove. I just rock up there, turn up there and say, that looks good. Now I know I'll bring my favorite roasting pan and things of that nature. And that's what it is. Before that speech, I had an empty kete. Now I have a full kete. And to me, whether you're a speaker or a professional speaker such as ourselves, our job is to fill the kete.
Thank you, Kingi. Thank you. And Giora, any final words from you?
Just wanted to confirm. So Neil, that was a statement saying that Toastmasters need to write a new speech every meeting or whenever they deliver a speech, and professional speakers just do the same speech, more or less the same speech.
Yes, I didn't see the question mark there, so I thought it was just something to discuss about the fact that there can be a difference in a professional keynote speech as against a club speech. I think that was the intention.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, but it's because of the way things are. As Toastmasters, we go and we speak in the same space all the time. So we speak to the same club or same 2 clubs all the time. And if we do the same speech, even if it's, I think I see something in you, but I don't know what it is. If you hear this speech every meeting, it's going to be annoying. It's going to be boring. As a professional speaker, he can take that speech and every time he speaks to different audience. So they have not heard the speech again. And then it's, wow, this is incredible. It just changed my life. So that's really the main reason. As professional speakers, you go and you speak to different audiences, whereas Toastmasters, you kind of speak to the same audience. So you need to come up with new things. Plus in Toastmaster, it's good to challenge us and get us to do some stuff that usually we don't.
That's fantastic. And look, I want to say a huge, huge thank you to you. I personally have learned so much. So thank you. I'm sure the audience has got so much. And what this has said to me is that even if you are a professional, even if you are out there doing it, there is absolutely still a place for Toastmasters in your life. Here's the chance to go and have that audience that you can practice with, that you can try things out, that you can share your stories with, and also that you has been a big part in seeing you and me and us achieve great things. And one of the things I love about an advanced club like Auckland Advanced is we get to do these things at that next level up, because we know that everyone in the club or all the guests that come along are already Toastmasters. They've got those basic skills and perhaps they're looking for that next step. I think today we have got that next step. So thank you. And I will now hand over to our Toastmaster. Thank you.